You don't lack discipline, you just have too many exits.
Man, that hits hard right out of the gate.
Right. I mean, think about it. If you have ever sat down at your desk, like fully intending to finally conquer your inbox, and then somehow 45 minutes later, you're deep into a Wikipedia rabbit hole about, I don't know, the history of the stapler.
Oh, we've all been there.
Yeah, and you probably told yourself it's a moral failing. You tell yourself you're lazy or that your willpower is just fundamentally broken. But we've got a fascinating journey for you today on this deep dive.
We really do.
Because according to behavioral psychology and ancient military tactics and even modern neuroscience, your brain is actually doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Exactly. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah. So today, we're unpacking a stack of material that is going to completely reframe how we think about focus. We're looking at ancient Greek mythology, we've got behavioral psychology studies from PubMed on habit formation, some really wild Stanford research that challenges everything we know about willpower.
That Stanford stuff is mind-blowing.
It really is. And we're pairing all that with actionable frameworks from productivity platforms like Full OEN and K, plus some raw, real-world insights from a viral Reddit thread.
Which is such a great place to start, honestly.
Right. Our mission today, for you listening, is to fundamentally rewire how you think about your environment. We want to show you how to lock the doors to distraction so that doing the hard work literally becomes the path of least resistance.
And that's a profound shift, because we tend to view distraction as a character flaw, but it is actually a highly predictable response to our environment.
How so? Like mechanically?
Well, the human brain has this deeply ingrained evolutionary tendency to seek lower effort activities whenever the environment allows for it. So when you leave an escape route open, whether that's, a smartphone on your desk or an open browser tab, the brain just calculates the path of least resistance.
Right, it's just trying to save energy.
Precisely. So setting a calm, analytical tone here, the overarching psychological puzzle we're solving today is how to engineer your surroundings. Because if you remove the exits, if those bailout options just aren't there, staying with the work becomes the default.
And that brings us perfectly to this Reddit thread we found from the productivity subreddit. Because this user was having what I can only describe as an absolute epiphany about this exact thing.
Yeah, it was a really raw post.
Super raw. They wrote this long post detailing how, for weeks, they had just been a complete mess, missing deadlines, failing to study, and constantly beating themselves up for, not having stronger habits.
Like the classic guilt cycle.
Exactly. But then they realized something kind of uncomfortable. They realized they weren't failing because they lacked internal drive. They were failing because they practically laid out a red carpet for themselves to quit the moment the work felt even slightly difficult.
Yeah, they were diagnosing a major flaw in their own choice architecture.
Choice architecture. Break that down for us.
Sure. So in behavioral economics, choice architecture is essentially how choices are presented to us, and it fundamentally shapes the decisions we make. A critical component of that is friction.
Okay. Friction.
Right. So if you sit down to write a difficult report and your phone is resting face up right next to your keyboard, you have inadvertently engineered a zero-friction bailout option.
Yeah, the escape route is literally an inch away. There was this brilliant analogy another user brought up in the comments of that thread. They said that relying on raw motivation to get things done in a highly distracting environment is like trying to fill a bucket that has 10 tiny holes drilled into the bottom.
Oh, that's a great visual.
Isn't it? The water just keeps leaking out. Not because you aren't pouring enough water and meaning, not because you lack motivation, but because the holes are wide open.
Right, the tabs, the notifications, the clutter.
Yeah. So this user realized that when they forced their laptop into full screen mode and they literally put their phone in another room entirely and used a physical timer, the motivation stopped leaking.
Because they closed the holes.
Exactly. They closed the holes.
And psychologically, this makes perfect sense. When those bailout options are right there in front of you, staying put and focusing is no longer a passive state. It requires active, continuous discipline.
Wait, what do you mean by continuous?
I mean, you are forcing your brain to make a conscious choice not to pick up the phone, second by second, minute by minute.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, that constant suppression requires an enormous amount of cognitive energy.
Yeah.
But when you remove those escapes, the choice architecture flips. Suddenly, leaving the task requires more friction than just staying with it.
Okay, I hear that, and logically I get the choice architecture argument, but if I can just play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Is it really just about moving a piece of plastic and glass into the kitchen? Because I know my own brain. If I don't have my phone and I really don't want to do the work, I will find a new distraction. I will, like, stare at the dust on my blinds or start peeling the label off my water bottle.
Right. The brain is very creative.
Super creative. Doesn't the brain just organically generate an escape route if it wants one?
It will certainly look for relief if the task is aversive, yeah. But we have to look at the massive difference in cognitive cost. Peeling a water bottle label versus resisting a smartphone are two very different things.
How so? A distraction is a distraction, isn't it?
Not quite. According to the research highlighted in the FLOWN platform guide we reviewed, the smartphone is unique because it demands attention even when you aren't touching it.
Yeah.
It creates what psychologists call a monitoring threat.
A monitoring threat. Okay, I've definitely noticed that. Even if my phone is completely silent, face down, it feels like it has this gravitational pull. What is the brain actually doing in that moment?
Subconsciously, a part of your executive function is actively processing the potential of that device. Your brain knows that within that little rectangle exists infinite novelty. Social connection, variable rewards, dopamine hits.
Oh, right. It's a slot machine.
Exactly.
Oh,
So a background process is running in your head, constantly calculating, should I check it now? No. How about now? No.
wow. So I'm basically burning energy just ignoring it.
Yes. This subconscious monitoring actively consumes your working memory. Think of it like running a really heavy application in the background of your computer. The whole system just slows down.
That is wild.
So by physically removing the phone from the room, you aren't just hiding a distraction, you are severing that monitoring thread entirely. You instantly drop your visual and digital clutter, which drops your working memory load.
Meaning I have more RAM available for the actual work.
Precisely. Daydreaming about dust on the blinds just does not require that same constant high-stakes subconscious calculation that a smartphone does.
That completely reframes things. Moving the phone doesn't magically increase my moral fortitude. It literally gives my brain more bandwidth. But this kind of introduces a really big question, doesn't it?
Where are you going with this?
Well, if our environment is so crucial, and if resisting these temptations actively drains our working memory, we have to ask, is our internal discipline, our willpower, actually a finite biological resource? Like, does it literally run out like fuel in a tank?
Ah. You are hitting on one of the most fiercely debated topics in modern psychology right now.
Right. The New York Times piece we reviewed for this deep dive gets into this perfectly. Because for decades, the reigning theory was this thing called ego depletion, proposed by the psychologist Roy Baumeister.
Right, the glucose theory.
Yeah. The premise was that willpower is deeply tied to human biology, specifically blood sugar or glucose levels. The idea was that every single time you use self-control, say, resisting a cookie or biting your tongue during a frustrating meeting, your brain physically burns through glucose.
Your tank empties out.
Exactly. And when it's empty, you just lose your ability to self-regulate.
And, it was an incredibly elegant theory and deeply appealing to people. As the nutritionist Linda Bacon argued in that Times piece, the glucose theory of willpower provides a flawless biological alibi.
A biological alibi. I love that phrasing.
Right, tells us that our failures of self-control aren't really our fault. Biology just forced our hand. And the prescribed solution back then was quite literally to ingest sugar to restore your self-control.
Which sounds great to me. Just drink a soda and get back to work.
But this is where the Stanford research by psychologists Greg Walton and Carol Dweck completely destabilizes everything we thought we knew.
Right, because they questioned the entire premise. They asked, is this biological limit actually an objective reality, or is it just a psychological construct? Are we limited by biology or by belief?
And the methodology they used to test this is just brilliant.
Let's unpack that experiment, because it wasn't just like a simple survey. They brought participants into a lab and divided them up. And the first step was to deliberately fatigue the self-control of a specific group.
Yeah. They used a classic psychological stressor. So half the group was given a fairly easy, rote task. They were handed a page of text and asked to simply cross off every single letter E.
Okay, that requires some attention, but not a ton of self-control.
Exactly. But the other half of the group was given a highly taxing version of that exact same task. They had to cross out the E's, but they had to follow a very complex, counterintuitive set of rules.
I remember reading this. The rules were insane.
Yeah. And for example, they couldn't cross out an E if it was adjacent to a vowel, or if it was 2 letters away from a consonant.
Which just sounds maddening, because your natural impulse is to just cross out the letter, but you have to constantly stop yourself, evaluate this complex rule, and inhibit your physical action.
Right. It is a pure exercise in generating cognitive friction. It's designed to cause self-control fatigue.
Okay, so they've got this one group that is completely mentally drained from these stupid rules. What happens next?
Once they had theoretically depleted that second group, they gave everyone a final, highly demanding cognitive test where they had to exert self-control to avoid making errors.
And under Baumeister's old ego depletion theory, the people who did the maddening e-crossing task should perform terribly on this final test, right? Because their glucose, their willpower fuel, should be totally gone.
Exactly. And what's wild is that the old theory did hold up, but only for a very specific subset of the participants.
And this is where Dweck and Walton introduce the twist, the key variable, belief.
Right. Before the tasks even began, the researchers had assessed what the participants believed about willpower. Did they believe it was a limited resource that gets used up, or an abundant, self-renewing resource that is actually energized by a challenge?
And the results split cleanly along those lines.
Perfectly cleanly. The participants who believed willpower was a limited biological resource acted completely depleted. After the hard ease task, they made almost twice as many mistakes on the final cognitive test.
So they fulfill their own psychological prophecy.
They absolutely did. But the people who believed that willpower was self-renewing, the ones who thought doing a hard mental task actually warms up the brain for the next challenge, they were virtually unaffected.
That is staggering. They made very few mistakes on the final test, even though they had just endured the exact same frustrating task.
They weren't depleted at all. The mechanism here is profound. It suggests that while the brain obviously requires energy to function, the sensation of mental fatigue is often a psychological interpretation. It's not a strict biological limit.
So if you believe your tank is small, your brain interprets the first sign of difficulty as a signal to shut down. It starts looking for an escape route to conserve energy.
Right. But if you believe your capacity is vast, your brain interprets that exact same difficulty as a signal to engage deeper.
And what I love is that they took this out of the lab and into the real world, too. They tracked college students during finals week, which, let's be honest, is the ultimate stress test for human willpower.
Oh, absolutely. The perfect environment to test this.
The students who had been taught that willpower is self-renewing procrastinated significantly less, only about 1 to 2 times a week. But the students who believed willpower was heavily limited procrastinated 2 to 3 times a week.
And the self-renewing group actually scored 15% better on IQ-style problems during this period, too. Furthermore, it completely dismantled the sugar requirement.
Oh, right, the glucose thing.
Yeah, the study found that giving participants a sugary drink only boosted the performance of the people who believed their willpower was sharply limited. It acted almost as a psychological permission slip to keep working, rather than an actual biological fuel.
Okay, I have to push back here, because this is getting really interesting, but also a bit confusing for me.
Okay, let's hear it.
If willpower is largely dictated by our mindset, and if we can just, believe our way into infinite self-control, why do we still collapse on the couch and watch 4 hours of TV instead of working out after a long day?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, if I know this Stanford study, and I tell myself my willpower is self-renewing, why am I still standing in my kitchen at 8 p.m. eating a cold piece of microwave pizza instead of making a salad? Doesn't the brain objectively seek lower effort activities regardless of what I believe?
That is a crucial distinction to make. Adopting a self-renewing mindset gives you a deeper well of resilience, yes. But it does not erase the fundamental biological reality of the human condition.
Okay, so we're not superheroes.
Exactly. It does not mean you stop feeling fatigue. The researchers themselves noted that people with the self-renewing belief still get tired. They just don't interpret that fatigue as an immediate mandate to quit. But you are still dealing with a deeply ingrained neurological conflict.
The conflict between our present and future selves.
Yes. Philosophers and behavioral economists call this acrasia.
Acrasia. I know this term goes all the way back to ancient Greece, Socrates, and Aristotle. Let's look at how it actually functions in our modern lives.
Well, acrasia essentially translates to acting against your own better judgment. It is that deeply frustrating state of knowing exactly what is good for you, sincerely intending to do it, and then doing the exact opposite.
Story of my life.
Right. To understand the mechanics of acrasia, behavioral economist Daniel Goldstein provides a really practical framework. He models human behavior as a constant battle between our cold states and our hot states.
I love this framing because it immediately explains my microwave pizza phenomenon.
It completely does. So when you are in a cold state, your prefrontal cortex is firmly in charge. You are rational, calm, forward-thinking. This is you on a quiet Sunday morning drinking coffee, planning out your week.
In a cold state, I have brilliant intentions. I intend to eat healthy, stick to my budget, hit the gym every day.
Because your long-term preferences are in the driver's seat, there is no immediate environmental stressor.
Right. And then comes Tuesday at 6:00 p.m., the hot state.
Oh, the hot state is neurological chaos compared to the cold state. You are tired from a long commute. Your blood sugar might actually be low. You are stressed about an email from your boss. The amygdala and the brain's reward centers basically hijack the entire system.
And in a hot state, the brain literally stops valuing my 5-year plan.
Completely. It narrows its focus entirely to immediate release and instant dopamine.
The case study from Nick Wignall in our sources illustrates this perfectly. It's the classic mistake of going grocery shopping after work.
Oh, the worst time to go.
Literally the worst, because in a cold state on Sunday, you write a list full of lean proteins and organic arugula. But when you walk into the grocery store at 6:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, you are fully in a hot state. You're hungry, you're irritated by the crowds, your feet hurt.
And Wignall points out that in this state, the frozen pizza doesn't just look acceptable. Your hot state brain calculates the zero preparation effort and the immediate caloric reward, and it genuinely perceives the pizza as the superior, entirely rational choice in that specific moment.
Wow, it rationalizes the bad choice.
Because the hot state prioritizes immediate emotional regulation over long-term goals. Your brain views the chopping of vegetables not just as an annoying task, but as an intolerable delay to the relief it demands right now.
So Wignall's solution isn't to stand in the freezer aisle, staring at the frozen pizza and trying to summon a Stanford-level belief in infinite willpower to walk away.
No, that takes too much energy.
His solution is to change the choice architecture entirely. He suggests you only ever go to the grocery store on Saturday morning or immediately after dinner.
He is advocating for structural avoidance. You don't fight the hot state. You ensure the decisions are only made when you are in a cold state. You shop when you are full, rested, and calm.
But, and tell me if I'm wrong here, this raises a massive logistical problem for everyday life. We can't avoid hot states entirely.
We definitely can't.
Right. We are human. We will inevitably get tired. We will get stressed. Our executive function will wane. So for the listener, if we know that Tuesday at 6 p.m. is going to arrive and we know our hot state will demand we abandon our goals, how do we preemptively build walls so we can't escape?
That is the ultimate question. And this exact problem is why human beings, for thousands of years, have relied on a specific behavioral technique to physically bind themselves to their goals.
Yes. This is easily my favorite part of the source material. We get to look at ancient mythology and military strategy to understand the origins of what behavioral economists call the commitment device, or, as it's often called, the Ulysses Pact.
Let's start with the mythological origin. It comes from Homer's Odyssey.
Right, so Ulysses, or Odysseus, is sailing his ship home from the Trojan War, and he knows his route takes him directly past the island of the Sirens.
The Sirens, of course, being these mythical entities whose song is so beautiful and enchanting that any sailor who hears it instantly loses their mind.
They enter an uncontrollable hot state, jump into the sea to reach the island, and drown. But here's the catch. Ulysses is currently in a calm, rational, cold state. He is planning for this deadly hot state, and he really, really wants to hear the song.
He wants to experience the ultimate temptation, but he wants to decouple it from the catastrophic consequence. And this is where the witch, Circe, acts as the ultimate behavioral architect.
Oh, her advice is brilliant.
Notice what she does not do. She did not tell Ulysses, listen, you are a great leader. Just use your willpower. Listen to the song, but just try really hard not to jump off the boat.
Because she knows willpower is fundamentally useless against the Sirens. The hot state will completely override his rational mind.
Precisely. She understands the specific nature of the temptation. It is auditory. So she designs two different environmental interventions. For the crew, who need to physically row the boat, she instructs them to plug their ears entirely with thick beeswax.
So they can't hear the song at all. The temptation never registers in their consciousness.
Exactly. But for Ulysses, who insists on hearing it, she changes his physical environment. She has the crew bind him tightly to the heavy wooden mast of the ship with ropes.
And the crucial detail here is the secondary instruction she gives the crew. She tells them that once the song starts, Ulysses is going to lose his mind. He's going to beg them, threaten them, order them to untie him, and she mandates that no matter what he says, they must ignore him and actually bind him tighter.
It is the flawless execution of a commitment device, and it works perfectly. They sail past the island. Ulysses hears the song, enters an agonizing hot state, and uses every ounce of his energy trying to break free and destroy himself.
But the ropes hold.
The physical constraints he voluntarily established during his cold state hold him securely in place. He survives because he intentionally removed his own agency.
It's so cool, and we see this exact psychological maneuver utilized in actual military history as well, according to the Wikipedia source.
Yes, General Han Xin of ancient China.
Right, during the Battle of Jingxing, he was facing an enemy force that massively outnumbered his own army. And he knew human nature. He knew that when the battle started, the sheer terror of the situation would trigger a collective hot state among his soldiers.
Their instinct would be to seek an escape route, to turn and run for their lives.
So he anticipated the choice architecture of a standard battlefield where retreat is always an option, and he radically altered it. He intentionally positioned his army with their backs against a raging, uncrossable river.
He entirely removed the physical escape route.
Exactly. When the enemy attacked, the soldiers couldn't run. Their only possible option for survival was to fight the enemy head-on with absolute desperation. He locked the doors to distraction, where distraction means fleeing the battlefield. They fought ferociously and won.
When we synthesize these mythological and historical events, we can isolate the two non-negotiable criteria of a true commitment device. First, the constraint must be voluntarily adopted while the person is in a rational, cold state. Ulysses asked to be tied up. Han Xin intentionally chose the riverbank.
Right, you have to lock the door while you're still thinking clearly. What's the second?
Second, the device must tie immutable or highly costly consequences to the failure of follow-through. It must make the act of quitting vastly more painful than the act of continuing.
Now, obviously, we are not commanding ancient armies, and our daily sirens aren't mythical creatures trying to drown us.
Thankfully.
Our sirens are like the ping of a Slack notification or the infinite algorithmic scroll of a social media feed, or just the quiet urge to go clean the kitchen instead of writing a proposal.
Which brings us to the modern applications of the Ulysses Pact, how we apply the economics of accountability today.
Yes, shifting to modern applications, specifically looking at the platform Stick, which was founded by two behavioral economists from Yale, Dean Carlin and Ian Ayres.
SICK is a fascinating platform. They built an entire infrastructure around two well-documented behavioral economics principles: loss aversion and time inconsistency.
Let's define those for the listener. Starting with loss aversion. This is the concept pioneered by Kahneman and Tversky, right? The idea that human beings feel the psychological pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining that exact same thing.
Exactly. Finding $50 on the sidewalk feels nice, but having $50 fall out of your wallet ruins your entire day.
Oh, completely ruins it.
StickK weaponizes this asymmetry. Users sign legally binding commitment contracts to achieve a highly specific personal goal: finishing a novel, losing 10 pounds, quitting smoking. You pledge a certain amount of your own money, and if you fail to meet your milestones, you permanently forfeit that money.
And that solves the time inconsistency problem, too.
Let's explain time inconsistency.
Right, so that's when the reward for doing the hard work, like having a finished novel or being healthy, is months or years in the future. But the pain of sitting down to type or going for a run is happening right this second. The hot state always chooses the immediate comfort over the distant reward.
But by putting money on the line, you introduce an immediate, acute pain to the act of quitting. You alter the hot state's calculation entirely. Quitting no longer brings instant relief. It brings instant financial loss.
And they enforce this through referees. You have to appoint a third party to monitor your progress. If you don't submit your proof or your referee declares you failed, the system automatically charges your credit card.
And the data speaks for itself here. If someone just states a goal on the platform without putting any money down, their success rate is around 35%.
And not great.
But when users put money on the line and utilize a referee, the success rate skyrockets to 78%.
That is a massive jump. The financial penalty is literally the modern equivalent of the heavy ropes binding Ulysses to the mast. But what is truly fascinating is how creative and sometimes extreme people get with these contracts to ensure their loss aversion is absolutely maximized.
Yeah, people go to some wild lengths.
Let's talk about the extreme examples from the sources. And I want to set this up really carefully for our listeners. On platforms like Stick, if you fail your goal, you can choose to have your forfeited money go to a friend or to a charity you support. But the most effective mechanism they offer is called an anti-charity.
Right, the anti-charity.
This is an organization that you personally oppose. Now, it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you sit on. We're remaining strictly impartial here. The idea is simply to find a group whose views clash so violently with yours that the mere thought of funding them makes your stomach turn.
It supercharges your loss aversion by combining financial loss with ideological disgust.
Exactly. So the Vanity Fair article highlights the filmmaker Alice Wu. She was desperately struggling to finish the screenplay for her critically acclaimed movie, The Half of It. To mathematically force herself to finish the script within a strict 5-week deadline, she wrote a physical check for $1,000 made out to the National Rifle Association, the NRA.
Because she vehemently opposes the organization.
Right. And again, no political stance from us here, just reporting the source. But she handed that check to a trusted friend with irreversible instructions. If she did not hand over a completed draft by the deadline, the friend was required to mail the check.
Think about the choice architecture in that scenario. When the hot state hits and she feels the profound friction of writer's block, the option to quit is no longer a relief.
The psychological pain of writing the difficult scene is vastly outweighed by the psychological agony of financially supporting a cause she despises.
The commitment device makes writing the path of least resistance.
We see the same logic applied through public humiliation by the comedian Nathan Fielder.
Oh, this one is hilarious.
It's so funny. He needed to force himself to finish a script. So he took a wildly embarrassing, fully nude photograph of himself posed as a hot dog, and he sealed it in an envelope addressed to his grandmother, a person he stated he would rather die than see him in that context.
And what did he do with it?
He handed the envelope to a legal notary, bound by a contract to mail it if Fielder did not produce the script in 2 weeks.
It is comedic, but it perfectly adheres to the structural rules of the Ulysses Pact. He voluntarily adopted an immutable, catastrophic consequence during a cold state to govern his future behavior.
Nick Wignall also provided some great, slightly less extreme daily examples that don't involve nude photos or anti-charities. He talks about using apps like Self-Control that forcefully block distracting websites at the DNS level for a set period.
You literally cannot turn it off without wiping your computer.
That is digital beeswax in your ears right there. Or James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, who literally has his assistant change all his social media passwords every Friday afternoon, so he physically cannot log into his accounts over the weekend, no matter how much his hot state wants to.
These are powerful tools for sure. But, and this is important, we must look at the academic caveats here. Daniel Goldstein, the behavioral economist whose hot and cold state framework we used earlier, offers some very stern warnings about the limitations of commitment devices. They are not a flawless panacea.
Really, where do they break down? Like, if I'm locked out of my internet, how does that fail?
Goldstein points out two major vulnerabilities. The first is that rigid commitment devices can inadvertently promote learned helplessness.
How does that work?
Imagine you use a strict financial commitment device to enforce a very rigid diet. You are doing perfectly for weeks. But then, you attend a friend's wedding, and in a moment of extreme social pressure, you eat a single piece of cake. It's a minor lapse. But because the commitment device operates on a binary pass-fail metric, your brain recognizes that the contract is broken.
Ah, I see. The structural wall has been breached.
Exactly. Instead of adjusting and moving forward, the rigid framework triggers a psychological collapse. Your brain says, well, the contract is ruined, the money is lost, I might as well eat the entire cake and abandon the diet completely.
It turns a small stumble into a total structural failure.
And the second vulnerability is that most of our daily commitment devices are what economists call mutable, meaning they can be reversed. If you decide you are watching too much television, you might unplug your TV and put it in the closet. That is a mild commitment device. But when Tuesday at 6 p.m. rolls around and you are in a furious hot state, you can simply walk to the closet, carry the TV back out, and plug it in.
You just undo the pact.
As Goldstein notes, you end up playing the exhausting role of both Ulysses and the crew. You use your cold state to bind yourself, Then you use your hot state energy to painstakingly weasel your way out of the bindings, and then you beat yourself up with guilt afterward.
That is a depressing cycle. You're binding yourself, then weaseling your way out, then beating yourself up. So if commitment devices have loopholes and our willpower is drained and our hot states are just too clever, what is the ultimate fallback? When we are totally drained, what actually keeps us moving forward?
The answer lies in the architecture of human automaticity. We have to outsource our discipline to our habits. Strong habits are what take over when self-control is at its lowest.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of this with the PubMed study we have by researchers Neal, Wood, and Drolet. This specific piece of research completely overturned my understanding of what happens when we are exhausted.
It is a phenomenal, highly counterintuitive piece of research. But to grasp its importance, we first have to rigorously define what a habit actually is neurologically.
Because it's not just something I do a lot.
Exactly. In casual conversation, we use habit to mean anything we do often. But in cognitive psychology, habits are highly specific. They are repeated behavioral responses that are automatically triggered by environmental cues in your performance context.
Right, so the cue is the trigger. It could be a specific time of day, a physical location, a smell.
Yes, you walk into your dark kitchen, you automatically reach for the light switch. You don't deliberate. The context of the dark room cues the physical action. And because this impetus to act is completely outsourced to the environment, performing a habit relies on the basal ganglia, not the prefrontal cortex.
Meaning it doesn't take willpower.
It requires virtually zero of your finite executive function or self-control resources. You don't have to choose to do it. You just execute the program.
It bypasses the whole willpower debate entirely. It doesn't matter if your tank is full or empty because a habit doesn't draw from that tank.
Precisely. But here is where the Neal, Wood, and Drolet study becomes truly fascinating. They wanted to observe what happens to our habit execution when our self-control resources are genuinely thoroughly depleted.
When you are deep in the hot state, exhausted, stressed out.
Yes. The logical assumption would be that when you are exhausted, you do less of everything.
Yeah, you just shut down.
But they found something entirely different. They discovered that when self-control is severely limited, people certainly lose the ability to deliberatively choose difficult new actions. But crucially, they also lose the cognitive ability to inhibit their automatic responses.
Wait.
They lack the energy to stop themselves from doing what they naturally do. Therefore, cognitive depletion actually increases the performance of habits.
Wait, let me make sure I'm hearing this right. Being completely exhausted makes you more likely to execute your habit.
Exactly. Because inhibiting a habit requires active willpower. If you are exhausted, you don't have the brakes to stop the automatic behavior.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. It's like an airplane on autopilot. Imagine your executive function, your willpower, is the human pilot. When the pilot is awake, rested, and alert, they can fly the plane manually wherever they want. They can override the systems. But if the pilot is completely exhausted and falls asleep at the controls, the plane doesn't just immediately fall out of the sky. The autopilot system takes over. And the plane flies exactly where the autopilot is programmed to go.
That is a perfect synthesis of the neurology. The basal ganglia is the autopilot. And here is the danger. The habit cueing mechanism is entirely blind to your long-term goals. It just runs the code that is programmed into it.
Oh, wow.
Researchers explicitly noted that depletion boosts the performance of both desirable and undesirable habits.
So if I'm tired, I'm just going to do whatever my default is. If my autopilot is programmed to reach for my phone and doom scroll the moment I sit on the couch, exhaustion guarantees I will do exactly that. I will leak motivation because I lack the energy to stop the autopilot.
Yes.
But if my autopilot is programmed to put on my running shoes the second I walk through the front door, exhaustion will actually propel me to go for a run because I lack the energy to argue myself out of it.
Precisely. You fall to the level of your systems. Which brings us perfectly to the most practical application of this entire deep dive. How do we deliberately program that autopilot? How do we ensure the default is actually productive work and not doom scrolling?
Yes. This is where we integrate the actionable frameworks from the Follow Damien guide and the entrepreneurial insights from Steve Biz blog. The core premise here is incredibly liberating. The Flow Benone guide states it beautifully. Pilots don't argue with gravity, they build a runway.
Flow is not a vibe you summon, it's a setup.
I love that. You cease relying on fleeting motivation and instead engineer the physical and digital conditions you inhabit. Let's break down this flow runway method, because every step directly counters the brain's desire for those escape routes.
Let's do it. Step 1 and 2. Clear goals and shrinking the first move. The guide emphasizes that a vague task is an absolute focus killer.
Oh, the worst, like having work on project on your to-do list.
Right, because a vague, undefined task creates massive cognitive friction. It forces your executive function to constantly question the parameters of reality. What exactly does work on project mean? Am I researching? Am I writing? That constant ambiguity is an open invitation for your brain to seek relief. It looks for a distraction to escape the discomfort of not knowing what to do.
I've always liked the poll booth analogy here. When the task is vague, the cognitive entrance tax to start working is just too high. You have to figure out the scope of the work before you can actually do the work.
So how do you lower the toll?
The solution is to mandate a hyper-concrete task. Not work on project, but draft the intro paragraph and write 3 subheadings. That gives the brain a laser-focused, unambiguous target. And then you deliberately shrink the first move to 2 minutes to basically remove the entrance tax entirely.
You reduce the friction of task initiation to virtually zero. Your only goal is to open the document and write one single sentence. You bypass the brain's resistance to a massive undertaking by making the initial commitment ridiculously small.
Step 3 is the challenge skill balance. The guide suggests you have to actively rate the difficulty of the task on a scale from 1 to 10.
This maps directly onto Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's original research on the flow state. If the task is a 2 out of 10 in difficulty, your skills vastly exceed the challenge. You become deeply bored, and a bored brain aggressively seeks an exit to find stimulation.
But if it's too hard?
If the task is a 9 out of 10, the challenge vastly exceeds your skills. You experience intense anxiety, and an anxious brain seeks an escape route to relieve the psychological pressure. You have to keep it hard but doable to stay in that flow channel.
Which leads perfectly into step 4, which was a massive light bulb moment for me.
Yeah.
Immediate feedback. Because think about playing a sport, like basketball or learning the piano. You get instant, objective feedback on every action. You shoot the ball, you see it miss, you press a key, you hear a wrong note.
Your brain instantly adjusts.
Right. But modern knowledge work, staring at a screen, organizing data, or writing emails, it completely lacks that instant feedback loop. You might work intensely for 3 hours and have no idea if what you produced is actually good.
And without feedback, the brain loses the thread of progress. Dopamine drops, and the urge to check your phone spikes. Which is why the expert advice is that you have to artificially manufacture your own feedback loops.
By setting micrometrics, tracking your word count every 15 minutes, setting up a 5-minute scorecard, or simply writing out microsteps on a physical piece of paper and aggressively crossing them out with a pen. The physical act of crossing the item out signals to your brain, yes, we are executing successfully.
That triggers a microdose of dopamine, which keeps the autopilot engaged.
And then we reach step 6, time containers, making infinite work finite.
This addresses the psychological terror of the open-ended mandate. If you sit down at 9 a.m. and tell yourself, I'm going to work on this strategy document until it's finished, your brain panics.
It immediately starts negotiating. Okay, this is going to take all day. That's exhausting. Let's just check the news for 10 minutes first to prepare.
But by utilizing strict time containers, like a 25-minute Pomodoro block or a 40-minute deep work session, you completely remove that internal negotiation. You are leveraging Parkinson's law, which states that work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion.
A finite boundary creates artificial urgency. And Steve Bizblog offered a fantastic entrepreneurial hack that pairs beautifully with this, specifically for tasks you genuinely despise.
Oh, the pairing technique.
Yeah, he talks about forcing yourself to pair disliked tasks with enjoyable rewards. For example, he absolutely hated doing cold calls for his business, so he instituted a personal rule. He tied the completion of his daily cold calls to his post-work glass of bourbon. If he didn't make the calls, he physically denied himself the bourbon.
Or only allowing himself to watch a favorite news show while on the elliptical machine. He essentially constructed localized daily commitment devices. He artificially layered an extrinsic reward onto the high-friction task to tip the scales.
Now, Fleming also provides some incredibly elegant tools for what happens when the real world inevitably interrupts you, because we get interrupted. The guide introduces the concept of the bookmark line, or the re-entry script.
This is a tactical defense against the cognitive cost of context switching.
Exactly. So imagine you are deep in a flow state and an urgent Slack message pops up that you must answer. Before you switch tabs, you leave one single line for your future self on exactly what to do next. Next action. Open Section 2 spreadsheet and summarize Q3.
It is brilliant because it eliminates resumption lag. When you return to a task, you usually stare blankly at the screen, burning energy trying to remember what you were doing. A re-entry script bypasses that friction entirely.
FLON also highlighted body doubling. They gathered data from 117 users with ADHD. Having a witness, even virtually on camera in silence, adds a profound layer of social accountability that significantly aids in initiating a task.
Having a witness fundamentally shifts the social dynamic of the room. It normalizes the act of focusing. Your brain's autopilot naturally conforms to the environmental norm rather than seeking distraction.
Okay, I have one final, highly practical question about this framework. What if I get everything right? I clear my desk, set a 2-minute first move, have my time container, I'm body doubling. And yet 15 minutes in, I still feel the urge to click away to a new tab. What do I do?
The urge itself is entirely normal. The fatal mistake is attempting to brutally suppress that thought. Actively telling yourself, don't think about the news, requires a massive expenditure of willpower. The solution is the distraction parking lot.
Explain how the parking lot functions in practice.
You keep a physical notepad open next to your keyboard. When the intrusive thought pops up, I need to buy dog food or check the weather, you do not ignore it, but you do not act on it either. You simply write it down in the parking lot. You acknowledge the brain's request, store it externally, and immediately return to the task.
You aren't fighting the distraction, you are deferring it. Wow. Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize this incredible journey we've been on today.
There's been a lot of ground covered.
We started by looking at a raw Reddit epiphany, realizing that motivation leaks out of the tiny exits we leave open in our environments. We explored the Stanford research that dismantled the biological certainty of willpower, showing us it might just be a mindset.
We dug into the ancient wisdom of the Ulysses Pact, learning how to outsmart our hot states using loss aversion, like those anti-charities.
And most importantly, we learned that when our executive function is depleted, we default to our habits like an autopilot. So our ultimate defense is to build a runway for flow, outsourcing our discipline to our environment.
And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment. Remind you that you do not fundamentally lack discipline. You are simply operating in an environment filled with trapdoors. By taking away the options to fail, success becomes the default.
It's the ultimate shift. But I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Building on all this source material, if our brains are hardwired to take the path of least resistance, and we know, objectively, that tech companies spend billions designing platforms to be that path of least resistance, are we actually fighting our own biology? Or are we fighting an invisible war against an environment that was specifically designed to leave all our escape routes wide open?
That's a chilling thought to end on.
Think about it. Thanks for taking the plunge with us today.
It has been a pleasure to explore this with you. Until next time.